we all know more how to manage our educational institution more effectively and properly, to bring our institution to achieve the goal we have set up. To me, I'm waiting for the time to welcome you, because I know when we have a time for calibrate or TQA, then the time for me as well to invite you to be here. That's why I talked to Ajahn Sunny and Ajahn Bill, who's our close friend, and so far both of them help us a lot to manage our university and college as well. And today, not just International Buddhist Study College, but we invite our partner. We have our partner as well. We invite our friend from Mahamakut Buddhist University, our friend from Ratchapat Ayutthaya University. But both try to develop their institution to use Bowrish tool to manage their university. But for IBSC, I think not just me as the director or deputy director, but we invite the chair of a student, because they all will be next generation to move our college to deliver Buddha teaching and service to those who would like to come to learn here. And once again, I would like to thank you who dedicate your life to inspire many of us, to give a service to those, especially those who would like to come to learn Buddha teaching and learn how to ending suffering inside their mind. We know, we as a disciple of the Buddha, we not just serve Buddhists. Apart from that, we serve non-Buddhists as well as a key customer. So today, thank you very much for your coming. And I do hope that one day we will have more time to learn from Mr. Paul, and to me as well. I would like to learn everything from you and bring whatever we know to develop international Buddhist study and educational institution in Thailand. Thank you very much, Paul and Ajahn Bill as well. Thank you.
And next, I would like to invite Mr. Paul Grizzell, President for Core Value Partner in Corporations from USA, to give our the special lecture. Thank you. Please.
I am humbled to be here. I'm honored. I'm humbled to be here. I'm honored to be here. It was a highlight of my first trip to Thailand last year to be here in Ayutthaya, and we experienced great hospitality. My wife was with me the last time, and you took her touring, you took me touring, and this is a fascinating city. And again, I appreciate being able to be here. Very good. And let's see. There we go. So one thing I would like to emphasize, and we just talked about this before coming in, is that organizations that use the Baldrige framework are not organizations that are struggling and don't know what to do. They tend to be organizations that are good to very good. And they're saying, we're not satisfied with that. Whoops. Thank you. I'm 68 years old. Sometimes my technology is not good. But as I was saying, the Baldrige framework tends to be used by organizations that are good to very good. And I would place IBSC in that. And just because of the fact that the other colleges, universities that are here and interested, wouldn't make me think that you are in that same situation, being good to very good, but not being satisfied with that. So what I'm going to talk about today is moving from being a compliance-focused organization to an excellence-focused organization. I hope that it's inspirational, that makes you think, I understand that this is more than just an application for an award. This is something that is going to help make us the university that we aspire to be, because you're on that path already. And what do you need to do to move to the next levels of performance excellence? So that's the question I would ask of all of you is, do you have a culture of compliance, or do you have a culture of excellence? Now, I find in most organizations that it's a combination of both, because let's face it, every organization has compliance things that they have to meet. Please don't leave here and say, well, Paul Grizzell said compliance isn't important. Compliance is very important, but it's the basics for where you need to be. I like to use this model to say that an organization that's just getting started has a lot of focus on meeting the basic requirements, the compliance requirements that say, this is what you have to do to be in business, to have your doors open. And many times in those organizations, you say, well, tell us about what you do to become an excellent organization. And they'll point to one person and say, oh, Bill over there is responsible for excellence, instead of it being a culture where everyone is focused on that. So in this diagram, I like to just think about the idea that if this side is a 1 and this side is a 10, consider, where would you be on that 1 to 10 scale? Because 10 is going to be kind of perfection. Nobody's there yet. But where do you think you'd be on that scale? And using the Baldrige framework helps you identify that. So what I've got on the far right is the organization that is focused on excellence. They hire people that they know will drive excellence. It's all about what are we going to do to be as good as we can possibly be, and we're going to meet those compliance requirements. So that's important also. So I'd encourage you to think about where you would be on that scale of 1 to 10. Now, what I also want to emphasize here is that journey from one side to the other must be led by leadership. And in visiting with the senior leaders of IBSC, it's evident that you are an organization that is focused on excellence in what you deliver to your students, what you deliver to your community. and that's just very evident. But this is not something that starts at the bottom of the organization and works its way up. It needs to be supported and encouraged and, frankly, required by senior leadership. Let's talk about it in a different way. Compliance is meeting regulatory requirements. It's quality that's required to be in the business, to have your doors open. On the other hand, performance excellence is something that not everybody's going to do. But things like using Baldrige, using the Thailand Quality Award program to assess and give feedback on what you could work on. And then tools like Plan, Do, Check, Act, or Six Sigma, or Lean, some of those that say, how do we improve? What is our improvement, our performance improvement methodology? I find that really when it comes down to it, organizations that are Baldrige Award recipients have a culture of continuous improvement. And it's not just random. It's not just somebody saying, I think we ought to do this. It's very structured in how improvement happens. Now, why is that important? It's because that gap that's going up is demonstrating your move towards world-class performance and competitive advantage. If you want to be recognized as the world-class university in Buddhist studies, this is a model that you can use that will help you accomplish that. The interesting thing about it also, and you will see examples as I go through the session, and I thought about this before coming here. I'm giving you examples from the education criteria that talks about students instead of patients in the healthcare version and customers only in the business version. But I'm also bringing up examples from other industries, because if you think that the only people you can learn from are other universities, then you're missing out on some great opportunities for learning about best practices. So I'm going to have examples in here from healthcare. I'm going to have some examples in here from education. I'm going to have some examples in here from manufacturing, all of which I truly believe are best practices that you can learn from. So if you aspire to be a world-class university, this is the kind of model that can help you accomplish that. So people say, well, what is Baldrige? Is it just an award process? To me, this is the definition that I've put together. The Baldrige framework is an outcome-focused, evidence-based management model that represents the leading edge of validated leadership and performance practices. Okay, you notice it doesn't say anything about universities. It doesn't say anything about manufacturing. It doesn't say anything about healthcare. It's a management model that is appropriate to any kind of organization. The key words in this are what's in blue. It is outcome focused and it's evidence based. Now, there are lots of things out there, and they tend to be the things that are your regulatory requirements. They come in and they say, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And they're just looking for, are you doing something, as opposed to, are you doing something and is it improving your results? Okay, so it's outcome focused. Are you truly getting better because you're doing something. The second set of words in blue are evidence-based. And it isn't Dr. Sunny or Bill or Paul saying, this is what you ought to do. It's saying that research over 35 years of the Baldrige program, looking at the practices that high-performing organizations do, is what's incorporated into the Baldrige framework. So again, it isn't just me coming in and saying you ought to do this. It's years and years of research into what high-performing organizations do. The other thing is, in an organization like yours, humility is something that's important. I like to think that I'm humble in the way I do things, but there's nothing wrong with saying we want to be the best, because that is showing that you are accomplishing. And just as I walked in today, as I took the elevator up, I saw your mission statement, a powerful mission statement, and your values. And to me, that's always what the journey that you're on should focus on, is how are we becoming that organization that accomplishes the mission and the values that we say are so important to us. So I'll give you just a little bit of a history of the Baldrige program, because it's not really that important, but I think it's important to recognize. In the United States in the 1980s, there was a recognition that, especially in our manufacturing industry, that our quality of products and services was not very good. And it wasn't very good compared to the Japanese, who were making automobiles that were much better than our automobiles, and various things that were saying, you know what, we're not doing very well here. And so the Baldrige program was established, and it's actually a part of the United States government Department of Commerce, what's called the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And it was named after Malcolm Baldrige, whose picture is on the right. And I look at this picture every time and I think, couldn't you have come up with a better picture of Malcolm Baldrige than this one that makes him kind of look like a ghost? So anyway, that's how the program was established, and it has evolved from being a manufacturing quality award to being a performance excellence award that is relevant to all industries. So, we've got big manufacturing organizations that are using it. We have, the church that I go to, I'm using it a little indirectly, but helping them understand, what do you need to do to be as good as you aspire to be? The Baldrige program today, it sets a standard. So as I said, it resides within the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And that's where in the United States, they say, okay, a measurement of a kilogram. You go to a little museum there, and in a glass case is a little weight, and that is the standard for what a kilogram is. Or a meter, and you see these standards for what these measurements are. What I like to think is that the Baldrige framework is like the standard for excellence. The difference is a kilogram is never going to change. It will always be a kilogram. But the Baldrige framework, every 2 years, the Baldrige program looks at it and says, what do we need to do? What are we learning that we want to incorporate into this that's going to address some of the key changes in what's going on in not just business, but business, education, healthcare. So think of it as the standard that says, this is a description of what high-performing organizations do. So as you progress on your Baldrige journey, think about this. I see a lot of organizations that this is kind of the way they operate. You know, everybody's going in a different direction. They may think they're doing the right thing, but nothing is aligned. Everybody is doing what they think is important, and frequently you're at cross purposes. You're doing things that may conflict with another area. With a mission and values and a vision statement of where you want to be and how you want to be viewed, your values, you start getting alignment in an organization of what you need to be working on. And then things like Baldrige-based performance excellence assessment, like Thailand Quality Award, help you take a magnifying glass and look at that and say, what do we need to do to move forward? And what you find is you become much more aligned as an organization. Your processes, the way you accomplish work, becomes more standardized in how you do it and more aligned between departments who recognize how they need to work together to accomplish things. Now, I want to just take a step back and say this, I will make this presentation available to anybody who wants it. So we'll provide that. So don't feel like you have to take pictures of things. I will make sure that you have a copy of this for a resource moving forward. Now, here's another concept that I want you to have here is when you get a feedback report from the Thailand Quality Award, they have a set of strengths. Here's what you're doing well, and what are called opportunities for improvement. And in organizations that I work with, that when they get this report, they tell me, well, our weaknesses were such and such. And I say, no. Don't think of them as weaknesses. This is one of the things I appreciate the most about a Baldrige-based assessment like Thailand Quality Award does, is that instead of, frequently regulatory audits and assessments give you a report and it says, here are all the things you're doing wrong. Thailand Quality Award feedback report will have a list of strengths. And I want you to think of this visualization. It's like somebody standing next to you and putting their arm around you and saying, hey, really good job. Here's what your strengths are. Here's what you're doing well. And here are your opportunities for improvement. This is what you can do to move to the next level of performance. It's not saying, here's what you're doing wrong. It's here's what your opportunities are to get better. Does that make sense? So what I find in organizations that are using the criteria is they've adopted that phrase of opportunity for improvement and made it something positive. So they're always asking their employees and their customers, what are our opportunities for improvement? What can we do to get better? And it kind of changes the culture to that culture of continuous improvement. I work with a long-term care facility for elder care in Honolulu, Hawaii. And they, based on their Baldrige journey, they now have books in each department. And if an employee thinks, you know what, we could improve this, they write down the opportunity for improvement. And at the end of each week, leaders go through and they find what the opportunities for improvement were, and they bring that to a leadership meeting to say, what should we do with this opportunity for improvement? And most of them are adopted. And if they aren't adopted, the person who wrote it down is told, well, we can't do that because of finances or something, but it's a good cycle to get all of the employees thinking about what can we do to be a better organization. So weaknesses tend to be something bad. Here's what you're doing bad, as opposed to good. It's wrong versus right, and it's a weakness versus a strength. Now, with opportunities for improvement, it's like this. As an organization matures, this is an example from an organization that I worked with, that when they got started with the Baldrige framework, they did not have a strategic planning process. It was kind of like the CEO of this hospital would say, okay, here's what we're going to do, and that's what they did. Okay, their opportunity for improvement from their first feedback report in that area was the organization does not have a strategic planning process. Okay, that's pretty blunt to say, here's what your opportunity for improvement is. Over time, and I worked with them for about 6 years, they ended up, when they applied and got a site visit with the Baldrige program, this was their strategic planning opportunity for improvement, because they had said how closely they work with their suppliers. The organization does not have a method to gather supplier input to be used in the strategic planning process. Okay, that's a much more mature organization than the organization that didn't even have a strategic planning process. So again, I want you to think of opportunities for improvement as something that's positive, because it's going to help with that culture of continuous improvement that's an indicator for a high-performing organization. So I'm going to talk now about the basics of the Baldrige framework. What is it all about if you're not familiar with it? There are 3 aligned versions of the framework. There's a business version, a healthcare version, and an education version. And you can see on the right the differences between them. There is very, very little difference other than just language difference. So in business, it talks about customers. In healthcare, it talks about patients and families. In education, it talks about students and stakeholders. Now, the education framework is relevant to higher education, like IBSC. It's also relevant to education for children. In the United States, it would be kindergarten through 12th grade. So when you talk about students and stakeholders, for instance, in elementary school, stakeholders might be the families, the parents of the students. You would probably have a different set of stakeholders, but your primary customer would be students. Okay, and then just again, language. In business, it talks about product offerings. In healthcare, it talks about healthcare services. In education, it talks about your educational programs. In what's called the process category, business talks about product and process design. Healthcare talks about service and process design. And education talks about program, service, and process design. Initially, the Baldrige program just had one version, and they found that healthcare people would say, well, but we don't really have customers, we have patients. And, especially elementary school would say, you know what, I have a hard time seeing that 7-year-old as my customer. So the language is what the language is really the difference here, but the processes and the things they require tend to be 99% the same. And when we talk about results, business talks about product results, healthcare talks about healthcare service results, and education talks about student and budgetary results, kind of the key areas. This is the Baldrige framework. And at the top is what we call the Baldrige model. And it talks about the organizational profile, which I'm going to talk about. And then it has 7 categories of areas that every single thing you do here at IBSC can fit someplace in this model. Everything that you do could fit somewhere in here. The thing I want to talk about now is what's at the bottom of this diagram, where it talks about the core values and concepts. And what is across the bottom is the 11 core values and concepts of Baldrige, the education version. And I want you to look at these because I think this is probably one of the most important things about the framework to help you understand, is this something that we want to use to get better? Because as opposed to the actual framework at the top, where it's going to ask how you do things, these core values are a description of what a high-performing organization does. A high-performing organization has a systems perspective. They work together as opposed to in what I would call silos. Visionary leadership. The leadership sets direction, inspires people. Student-centered excellence. They're very focused on being an excellent organization in providing what students are wanting and expecting. They value people. And by valuing people, that can be your students, it can be your employees, it can be your fellow leaders. Agility and resilience, the ability to adapt. And for agility and resilience, I always encourage people to think about, okay, think back to our challenges that we had with COVID. Did you have to adapt to doing things differently during that time? Yeah, you certainly did. And every organization that adapted well is still around. There are organizations that did not adapt well that are no longer in business. So these 11 core values I find to be so important in saying this is what we aspire to be as an organization. These core values are listed in the Baldrige Framework book, and I can provide a sample, or I can provide a separate document that has those education core values, because I think they are so important to setting the context for why are we using the Baldrige Framework. So these are those core values again. And some of these are things that you think, well, of course, visionary leadership and student-centered excellence. Some of them are a little different, like the systems perspective and societal contributions. One thing that the Baldrige research found over years is that high-performing organizations don't just stay within their own walls. They're looking for what can we do to support the community, even beyond just what we do as, teaching students or providing healing in a healthcare organization, things like that. Okay, now I'm not expecting you to be able to read the details in this, but what this is Baldrige core values down the left-hand side, and across the top are the Baldrige Framework, where it asks, how do you do, how do you lead? How do you do strategic planning? How do you listen to your customers? And every place that there's a filled in block, that's saying that part of the criteria is going to help you become that organization represented by the core values. I hope that makes sense. So in other words, let's see. If I'm saying, you know what, we think there is the opportunity to have a systems perspective, these various areas right here as part of the criteria are going to be questions that are going to drive you to say, okay, are we doing that? Let's describe how we do that. And I promise you that it will help you become a better organization by going through those questions and being very honest with yourself of, are we doing that well? And what I think are 4 very, very, very important words as leaders to say, well, if we say we're doing that, how do we know? Is there evidence through results or something that says, yes, we are doing that? So how do you know is a very important question to get past the idea of, well, management by fact. You know, I see a lot of organizations that have management by opinion. So a leader will say, I think we ought to do this. And nobody wants to argue with that leader. So they do it. It's not management by fact, it's management by opinion. A friend of mine worked for a hospital system. They had 10 hospitals in this system. And they were talking about making an acquisition of another hospital. And he was sitting at one end of the table, and the system CEO was over here, and the CEOs of the various hospitals were sitting around. And they were making some important decisions. And the system CEO was asking these hospital CEOs, what do you think? First of all, what do you think is a bad question. But he said these hospital CEOs were saying, I think we ought to do this, or I think we ought to do this. And he said he wanted to go up to the front of the table and whisper in that system CEO's ear and say, tell them you don't want to know what they think. You want to know what they know. What are the facts? So fact-based decision-making, management by fact. Okay. On the right-hand side here are those 11 core values of excellence. And on the left-hand side, I've listed what I think are kind of the opposite of that. Let's say it's probably those organizations that are compliance-focused organizations in how they do what that characteristic of excellence is on the right. So for the first one, a systems perspective. What they probably have is that silo mentality that says, okay, I'm responsible for the human resources function. All I care about is the human resources function. And if I accomplish what my goals are, that's all I'm worried about. As opposed to, am I hiring the right people? Are the people that I'm hiring for satisfied with the people that we're bringing in? So silo mentality. Visionary leadership, on the left-hand side, micromanagement of people. I think of micromanagement as that attitude of a leader who says, okay, I want you to go do this and this. Don't do anything else. And when you finish doing that, come back and I'll tell you what you need to do now. You know, I like to think of visionary leadership as being that kind of leadership that gives people permission to do things the best way possible. Student-centered excellence. I see this a lot in various organizations, that the basic requirement of their students or their patients or their customers is what they try to meet. as opposed to, we want to go above and beyond. We want people to leave with our product, with our educational service, with our healthcare service. We want them to leave and say, that was excellent service that I got. That was an excellent education that I received. Valuing people. The opposite of that, I think, is employees as a commodity. Who there are organizations who will say, you know what, the budget's a little tight. We're going to lay off 200 people. And they don't really think much of it. It's more like your employees are part of a machine that you replace, as opposed to people who are trying to just make a living. So I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I would encourage you to think about where you are on that journey of each of these. You know, just like I said, you know, a 1 to 10 scale on, are you a compliance-focused organization or an excellence-focused organization? Where are you on each of these in, you know, like the management by opinion versus management by fact? So, so think about where you are on a scale for each of those. And I would encourage you, and I hope this is okay with our leaders that are here. If you're not a leader here, if you're a student, if you're an employee, I hope that you feel comfortable, and I hope leaders feel comfortable with your saying, I think this is an opportunity for improvement here. So I would encourage people to think about here at IBSC, at the organizations that you work at, you know, where are we on that scale of compliance to excellence for these different things? So I do not anticipate that this is a university satisfied with mediocrity. But when I make this presentation to an audience that has lots of different leaders from lots of different organizations, I say, are you satisfied with mediocrity, or do you aspire to excellence in the eyes of all that you serve? And, you know, I think it's a great question, because I think a lot of organizations say, well, you know what, we're average. And frankly, I wouldn't want to work for an organization that says, oh yeah, we're average, that's just fine. I would want to work for an organization, for a university, for a healthcare organization, for a company that aspires to be very good. And my guess is that all of you, I know some of you certainly feel that way. So, you know, set that standard for excellence, not just to say we've got great results, but to say we are truly accomplishing the mission of our university, which is a very powerful mission. As I said, there on the elevator doors, it was made very evident to me what it is. So I will also say that this is the basis of worldwide different excellence models. So Baldrige is on the left. The European Quality Award has what they call their fundamental concepts that are very, very similar. And the China Quality Award, which is very similar to Baldrige, it's based on Baldrige. They have what they call their basic principles. And I always find it interesting that every model that you look at, leadership is always one of the core values. You know, with Baldrige, it says visionary leadership. With EFQM, it says leading with vision, inspiration, and integrity. I would equate that very much with visionary leadership. And the China Quality Award talks about leadership with foresight and, I never know how to pronounce this, sagacity, with wisdom. So I would look at all of those and say, all of those are very similar. They all talk about being customer driven, customer excellence. They all talk about people, succeeding through the talents of people. So anyway, I present this just to say the research from all these organizations has said these are the characteristics of what it looks like to be a high-performing organization. And Bill, if you could keep me on track and tell me when we need to take a break, because I don't have a watch on. Okay, would you like to summarize what I've talked about now? Okay, all right. Well, what I'd like to do is a short little exercise, if you would be okay with this. And I would like, you know what, if you could kind of get into some small groups of 5 or 6 people, and I'd like you to think about those Baldrige core values and identify what you think are the 3 core value strengths here at IBSC. And then I'd like you to think about what are the 3 core value opportunities for improvement. Remember, not weaknesses, but opportunities for improvement here at IBSC. Okay? So if you could break into some groups, and those of you from other universities, you might want to do it individually or just the 2 of you, and just think about what those strengths are. And I'm going to flip back to these. And I want you to think about, out of these 11, which 3 are strengths and which 3 are areas that you think we could improve on here at IBSC or at the university that you represent. Okay? Let's take about 10 minutes to do that. Okay? And then we'll come together and I'm going to ask some of you to share. Will you feel comfortable sharing? Good. Okay, let's take 10 minutes.
ขออนุญาตนิดนึงนะครับคือกรุณาเลือกสัก3ค่านิยมที่คิดว่ามีนัยสำคัญมากสำหรับองค์กรเราในปัจจุบันแล้วก็อีก3ค่านิยมที่เราเห็นว่าเราน่าจะพัฒนาปรับปรุงได้ดีกว่านี้โอเคไหมครับแล้วก็หลังจากเขียนแล้วก็ช่วยกรุณาอธิบายสักนิดนึงท่านมีเหตุผลอะไรนะครับพอจะเข้าใจไหมฮะจาก11นี้ฮะเลือกทั้ง3แต่เห็นว่าทุกวันนี้เรามีด้านนี้แล้วเราเก่งด้านนี้แล้วนั่นเป็นสิ่งที่ช่วยให้เราสู่ความเป็นเลิศและอีก3ค่านิยมที่เราเห็นว่าเรายังมีโอกาสในการปรับปรุงโอเคไหมครับ
ขออนุญาตนิดหนึ่งนะพอดีมีจากราชภัฏก็คิดแบบนี้ก็ได้นะครับจากราชภัฏท่านมีค่านิยมที่3ประการอะไรบ้างแล้วก็ opportunity ที่ท่านจะพัฒนาเนาะก็ได้ว่าในของสถาบันราชภัฏ so we are from not just only IBSC but others university also coming to join us anyway they can do
yeah they can certainly do that if you're from another university just talk about it or if there's just one person from the university if they just want to write some things down on their own so what I'm asking is that you would discuss and you would say I think that this one and this one and this one are strengths and maybe this one and this one are opportunities that we could get better at.
Maybe I'll do a little translation in Thai, the core values, right? So that they will understand a bit more. ผมจะอธิบายนิดหนึ่งฮะsystem perspective คือมุมมองเชิงระบบนะฮะมุมมองเชิงระบบก็คือว่าเรามองในองค์รวมนะฮะทุกสิ่งเป็นเนื้อเดียวกันนะที่2คือการนำองค์กรอย่างมีวิสัยทัศน์นะครับ3ก็คือความมุ่งเน้นความเป็นเลิศที่มุ่งเน้นผู้เรียนแล้วก็ลูกค้ากลุ่มอื่นนะ ไอ้ value people คือเราให้ความสำคัญกับคนฮะทั้งบุคลากรนะครับagility กับ resilience ก็ agility คือความคล่องตัวนะ resilience เนี่ยเราแปลว่าความสามารถในองค์กรในการเด้งกลับ ประมาณนั้นนะเมื่อมีปัญหาเนี่ยสามารถที่จะฟื้นตัวได้เร็วแล้วก็แข็งแรงกว่าเดิม organizational learning คือการเรียนรู้ระดับองค์กรนะเพราะว่าการเรียนรู้มี2แบบก็คือการเรียนรู้ตัวท่านเองและการเรียนรู้องค์กรคล้ายๆ KM นะครับ Focus on Success ก็คือว่าเรามุ่งเน้นความสำเร็จและนวัตกรรมนะแล้วก็บริหารโดยใช้ข้อมูลจริงแล้วก็เราให้สร้างประโยชน์ให้สังคมนะในวงกว้างนะแล้วก็มีจรรยาบรรณแล้วก็มีความโปร่งใสสุดท้ายก็ส่งมอบคุณค่าโดยมีผลลัพธ์ที่แสดงเป็นแบบนั้นโอเคไหมครับพอจะเข้าใจค่านิยมนะฮะอาจจะไม่จำเป็นต้องเข้าใจลึกซึ้งค่านิยมแต่ว่าในมุมมองของท่านเนี่ยนะว่าโอเคทุกวันนี้จาก11ค่านิยมนะมี3ค่านิยมที่องค์กรท่านมีอยู่แล้วและอีก3ค่านิยมที่คิดว่ามันน่าจะเป็นสิ่งที่องค์กรท่านควรจะมีโอเคไหมครับยกตัวอย่างที่ทุกวันนี้พระสัมพันธ์ของท่านความรู้สึกเป็นไงครับคนในองค์กรท่านในสถาบันท่านในความรู้สึกของท่านอะไรเด่นที่สุดครับ3เรื่องนี้ตัวอย่างเช่นเราให้ความสำคัญกับอาจารย์นะบุคลากรหรือว่าเราทุกวันนี้เราสร้างประโยชน์ให้ผู้เรียนในความเห็นของท่านนะ3ลำดับแรกหรือว่าเรามีความคล่องตัวสูงอะไรพวกนี้ใช่ไหมหรือว่าเราทุกสิ่งที่เราทำเรามุ่งเน้นที่จะ สร้างประโยชน์ให้สังคมคือ11ค่านิยมตรงนี้มันเป็นค่านิยมขององค์กรที่มีวัฒนธรรมที่เป็นเลิศนะเป็นแนวความคิดของคนในองค์กรนะที่เห็นร่วมว่าเป็นสิ่งที่วัฒนธรรมควรมีครับ
ท่านหลวงพี่ inspire คนไปยูทูบปฏิ
คือที่วันที่เขาใส่นี่แหละมันขอนี่แหละเขาเลือกใส่เนื้อเลยเขารู้ว่าเขาเริ่มเหมือนกันอยู่ใส่เนื้อเลยจริงๆไม่เป็นไรเขามันอยู่ที่คนพ่อมันต้องใส่เราเข้ามา
All I think is time so we have 3 group I think one from University from IBSC and IBSC.
Okay, let's just do a quick little. I hope each of you have 3 of each of the groups, but let me just ask, Bill, if you can have you got a pen, kind of keep track of things? Let's talk about strengths. So whether it's your university or IBSC, how many people had systems perspective as a strength?
ทั้ง3 กลุ่มมีมั้งนะ
None?
ที่
I'm not surprised at that. How many people had visionary leadership as a strength? Okay, one group in the back had that. How about student-centered excellence? How many had that as a strength? Okay. Yes? No? Not quite sure. Valuing people. Very quickly raise your hand. Very good. How about agility and resilience as a strength? Okay. Organizational learning. Okay. All right. How many people had a strength for focus on success and innovation? Okay. The back, here. Good. Management by fact. Okay. There. Societal contributions. Oh, very good. We'll talk some more about that later. Ethics and transparency. Okay. And delivering value and results. So that's kind of you need to look at it from the customer perspective, the student perspective, and say, okay, do they believe that they're getting the benefit from this? So, okay, you can see there's a lot of different opinions on things. Now, let's talk about that other side, the opportunities for improvement. And don't put your hands like this and be afraid of raising your hand. Oh, you're sitting right under the air conditioning, aren't you? I have to tell you just something a little different. Where I live in Minnesota in the United States. Minnesota is right up by Canada. And so we have times when it gets to -25 below zero and snow this deep in my yard. And so I come to Thailand and I'm like, when does it cool down? Now, when I have been someplace, when I look at the weather in the newspaper, each day I say, okay, how about my friends in Bangkok? Or how about my friends in Beijing? It's just always warm here. And when it's 25 below zero in Minnesota, I think that's when I should be visiting Thailand, not in the middle of summer. So let's talk about opportunities for improvement now. So how many people thought systems perspective was an opportunity for improvement? Opportunity for improvement. This is something that it would be good to work on. When I do this exercises with organizations, it doesn't matter what industry it's in. This tends to be one that they say, we've got to get better at that. Visionary leadership. Opportunity for improvement. How about student-centered excellence? think it needs to get better. And that's not saying you're bad at it. It's just saying we need to get better at it. Valuing people. Okay. Agility and resilience. Up at the top, thank you. Organizational learning. Okay. How about focus on success and innovation? Yes. Then management by fact. Okay, this is one that, like systems perspective, a lot of times organizations say, yeah, we've got to get better at that. Moving from management by opinion to management by fact, using data to make decisions. Societal contributions, ethics and transparency. Okay, and then delivering value and results. Yes, being able to say, here is what the value is of an education at IBSC. Okay, I would encourage you to keep thinking about these things and be able to say, to spend some time thinking about, what is a systems perspective. And again, I will provide you with the 5 pages from the framework that can be shared in any way you want, because it gives a good, like 3 or 4 paragraph description for each of these to say, this is what this means. And it's actually in the Baldrige framework, but what I find is that by providing it separately, it's easier to say, read these 5 pages than to give them this that can be kind of intimidating in what's there. Okay, so again, I encourage you to keep thinking about these core values. And remember, these are not the values of your organization. IBSC has said, here's what our values are, but this is just saying, here's what the characteristics of excellence are in an organization. And remember that grid, because as you use the criteria to get better at processes, you'll find that you're getting better in addressing these core values and concepts. Yeah.
Paul,
Okay.
Paul, may I add something?
Yes.
ไม่ทราบว่าท่านใดที่เชื่อในคอนเซปต์ว่าไม่เชื่ออย่าลบหลู่ไม่เชื่ออย่าลบหลู่นะฮะอันนี้เป็นตรงข้ามของ management by fact นะโอเคนะครับเพราะเรามักจะชอบบ้านเราเนี่ยไม่มี management by fact กับพวกเราบอกว่าไม่เชื่ออย่าลบหลู่นะแต่ว่าตามเกณฑ์ก็บอกว่าเราควรจะพิสูจน์โอเคไหมฮะตรงเนี้ยบ่อยครั้งเลยนะสายโมนะโอเคนะครับ
Now you need to translate for me now.
Yeah. So we have a saying in Thai that ไม่เชื่ออย่าลบหลู่ mean that do not disrespect anything that you don't know, and that is the opposite of management by fact, right? So I tell them that, oh, this thing I don't know, so I must be holy, so I don't touch them. But for us scientific, we have to everything by fact, right? So I think that is the national challenge of Thailand, that we do not management by fact, and nobody thinks we do not management by fact. I just want to emphasize that.
That's an interesting thought, because maybe what you need to be able to do is say, okay, what are the things that we need to manage by fact, and which are the ones we don't necessarily need to manage by fact. The other thing I want to say, I'm so thankful for my friend Bill, who is here. I speak one language. I respect all of you for being here who know at least Thai and some English. And so I am so impressed that you do that. If I bring up something that is confusing in English, raise your hand and say, I don't understand, and Bill will Bill will help us be sure that that happens. So anyway, I'm thankful that so many of you speak English. I'm embarrassed that all I do is speak English. Okay, I'm going to do one more slide, and then we're going to take our morning break. But I want you to know what we're going to be thinking about moving forward this morning. When you apply to the Thailand Quality Award, you put together what they call an application, what Baldrige calls an application. But one thing that I learned with the European Quality Award is they don't call it an application. They call it a management document. And they say, put together your management document. And if you want to submit it for assessment, you can. So I really like that language because it's, you know, if you say we're putting together an application for the Thailand Quality Award, everybody thinks, oh boy, here we are chasing another award. But if you say we're putting together a management document, that's really what it is, because it's saying, here is how we work at IBSP. And even if you don't submit it, it's going to be a great resource document for you here to say, here's how we work. And then eventually in 50 years, when you retire, you hand it off to someone else and you say, this is the way we work here. I look forward to how our successors move this organization forward. It is just such a great document to say, here is how we work. So I like to call it the management document. And the management document really has three parts to it. The first is what's called an organizational profile. And the organizational profile is about 5 pages long in an application, and it describes who we are and what's important to us. So how many employees we have, what are the employee groups, what's important to them, who are our customers, you know, our students, families, whatever your customer groups are, and what are their requirements. And then identifying what's important, it asks, what are your strategic challenges? What are your strategic advantages? What is your competitive environment like? What I find is that when leaders start putting this together, they end up having very good discussions, because when they say, okay, what's important to our employees? There are all kinds of opinions. And this forces, especially senior leader teams, to come together and say, okay, let's put this together and come to agreement as leaders that, yes, this is who we are and this is what's important to us. So that organizational profile is such an important document to start your management document with. And you always want to start and finish that before you get into the rest of it, because it sets the context for what you're going to be talking about in the rest of the application. Then you have what are called the process categories. And these are things like leadership, strategy, customer, measurement analysis and knowledge management, workforce, and operations. And in all of those process categories, everything you do here could fit someplace within there. That's not what you're going to talk about in every part of it, but it's talking about those key areas. What do we do? How do we do it? And how do we improve the way we do it? Remember, that culture of continuous improvement is what you want. And then finally, there's what's called the results category. And the results category are just, here's your results for student results, operational results, financial results, your workforce results. So were we successful? So think about that story. What's important to us? Based on that, what do we do and how do we do it? And then let's look at the results and say, are we doing a good job at all those things that we do? And if you see some results that say, oh, we're not where we want to be, then you should look back at that organizational profile and say, well, is that result something that's important? And if it is, then you should be looking at your processes, what you do and how you do it, to think about how can we improve that process so that our results improve. So to me, that's just a great story to say, here's what's important, here's what we do, and were we successful? So that's the big picture of what the application, the management document looks like. So we're going to go into detail on those various processes in the organizational profile, but let's take our break, which I think is scheduled for a half hour.
I'll take about 5 minutes, 10 minutes summarizing what you taught present this morning ครับคือสิ่งแรกนะครับผมว่าอันนี้ทุกคนสนใจมากกว่าเพราะนี่คือซา
Tell me if you'd like
Yeah,
to move to a
just
slide.
that one. This is the most important to them because จริงๆแล้วก็ self assessment report ผมบอกว่าสปอบอกว่ากรุณาเปลี่ยนชื่อเถอะมันไม่ใช่รายงานมันเป็นคู่มือความเป็นเลิศถูกไหมฮะมันเป็นคู่มือนะฮะแล้วคู่มือมันมี3ส่วนแรกต้องอธิบายว่าลักษณะองค์กรคือแบบไหนเพื่อที่จะคนประเมินรู้ว่าบริบทองค์กรเป็นอย่างไรถูกไหมต่อมากระบวนการคือสิ่งที่เราทำอย่างไรทำแล้วเรามีผลลัพธ์เนี่ยตอบโจทย์หรือไม่ตอบโจทย์นะนั่นคือองค์ประกอบ3ชิ้น3ส่วนของคู่มือความเป็นเลิศนะเรามักจะชอบเขียนว่าเราทำอะไรทำอะไรแต่ไม่ได้ถามตอบว่าทำอย่างไรถูกไหมไอ้อย่างไรมันอยู่ตรงกลางถูกไหมเราถามว่าถ้าเป็นรายงานเรามักจะตอบว่าเราทำอะไรแต่ว่าถ้าเป็นคู่มือเราต้องการถามอย่างไร1 2 3 4เป็นขั้นเป็นตอนเหตุผลคือว่าถ้านี่เป็นคู่มือความเป็นเลิศจากรุ่นสู่รุ่นท่านจะสามารถดูต่อไปว่า10 ปีที่ผ่านมาท่านพัฒนาทำไมโดยอ้างจากผลลัพธ์ไงว่าผลลัพธ์ดีขึ้นไหมสิ่งที่ท่านปรับปรุงถ้าสิ่งที่ท่านปรับปรุงผลลัพธ์ไม่ดีขึ้นปีหน้าคุณก็เปลี่ยนไปเหมือนเดิมดีกว่าโอเคไหมครับเพราะว่าบริบทแล้วสิ่งที่ท่านทำ result เป็นสิ่งที่ผลลัพธ์เป็นสิ่งที่ยืนยันว่าสิ่งที่ท่านทำมาถูกทางแล้วกำลังดีขึ้นต่อการปรับปรุงของท่านเนี่ยปรับปรุงอย่างถูกทางแล้วนั่นคือ3องค์ประกอบสำคัญของซาโอเคไหมครับกรุณาอย่าปัญหาที่คุณคะแนนได้ต่ำ200 150เพราะคุณเขียนแต่ what ไม่ได้บอก how นะและอีกปัญหาเนี่ยคือผลลัพธ์ก็ไม่ได้อธิบายว่ามันมีความสำคัญกับบริบทองค์กรอย่างไรเราจะไปทางเหนือแต่ผลลัพธ์ไม่เคยบอกว่าอย่างเช่นเอาง่ายๆนะฮะบริบทองค์กรบอกเราต้องลดน้ำหนักผลลัพธ์บอกอะไรครับอาทิตย์หนึ่งออกกำลังกายกี่ครั้งทานข้าวกี่มื้อแต่ไม่เคยขึ้นตาชั่งเห็นภาพไหมนั่นคือความสำคัญของผลลัพธ์ต้องตอบโจทย์ว่ากระบวนการทำได้ดีแค่ไหนตอบโจทย์องค์กรหรือเปล่าโอเคไหมครับที่เหลือก็คือสำคัญคือว่าคุณพอพูดถึงว่าตกลงเราต้องการเป็นองค์กรที่มุ่งสู่ความเป็นเลิศแล้วองค์กรที่ต้องการไปวันๆผ่านกฎหมายก็พอค่านิยมคืออะไรครับมันมี3ระดับทุกเราก็รู้1สิ่งแรกเราต้องทำไม่ผิดกฎหมายถูกไหมอันนี้คือมาตรฐานต่ำสุดละขึ้นมาอีกระดับหนึ่งคือจรรยาบรรณถูกไหมจรรยาบรรณเราไม่ติดคุกแต่เราไม่ควรทำถูกไหมค่านิยมมันขึ้นไปอีกระดับที่3นั่นคือความเป็นเลิศเพราะฉะนั้นน่ะทำไมเกณฑ์ก็ถามว่าเราไม่ต้องการไม่ผิดกฎหมายนอกจากไม่ผิดกฎหมายนะไม่ผิดจรรยาบรรณแล้วเราต้องเป็นเลิศนั่นคือค่านิยมสิ่งที่องค์กรท่านเห็นว่ามีความสำคัญอย่างยิ่งเห็นค่าไหมกฎหมายจรรยาบรรณค่านิยมเห็นภาพไหมนั่นคือความหมายทำไมต้องมีค่านิยม ค่านิยมคือกฎหมายที่เราตั้งกับพวกเราเองแหละเราจะต้องทำแบบนั้นมันสูงกว่าจรรยาบรรณทั่วไปมันสูงกว่ากฎหมายทั่วไปด้วยโอเคไหมครับแล้วก็ที่เหลือก็ไม่เคยมีอะไรนะครับไอจริงสรุปก็มีเท่านี้ เพราะค่านิยมสำคัญเราเพราะพูดถึงค่านิยมแล้วก็ไอซาหน้าตาเป็นยังไงถูกไหมเพราะถ้าเราเข้าใจค่านิยมปั๊บเนี่ยคำถามในเกณฑ์ทุกคำถามเนี่ยจะยิงกลับไปที่ค่านิยมเพราะว่าเกณฑ์บอริดนะฮะเริ่มจากเขาสัมภาษณ์200องค์กรที่เป็นเลิศในอเมริกาแล้วก็เข้าไปศึกษาว่าวัฒนธรรมองค์กรเขาเป็นแบบไหนค่านิยมองค์กรเป็นแบบไหนหลังจากสัมภาษณ์200องค์กรแล้วใช้เวลา3ปีเนี่ยสกัดออกมาเป็น11ค่านิยมองค์กรที่เป็นเลิศมีค่านิยมแบบนี้อย่าหวังนะฮะที่ท่านจะ11ค่านิยมเลิศไปทุกอย่าง3ค่านิยมเลิศท่านก็เก่งแล้วมีคนก็ถามว่าองค์กรอะไรที่แบบมีครบทุกค่านิยมไหมหรือว่ามี1,000คะแนนไหมผมบอกว่ามีอยู่2องค์กรในโลกเท่านั้นนะที่ได้1,000คะแนนนะได้จักรวาลด้วยสวรรค์กับนรกนะเพราะฉะนั้นไม่ต้องหวัง650ก็เป็นเวิลด์คลาสแล้วถูกไหมทำไมเหตุผลคือทำไมคะแนนท่าน100หรือ200แสดงว่าศักยภาพของท่านมี 1,000 แต่ทุกวันเนี้ยท่านใช้ศักยภาพแค่150เท่านั้นเองว่าขัดแข้งขัดขากันไปคนละทิศคนละทางกันเกณฑ์ต้องการช่วยจากค่านิยมกลุ่มพวกนี้ทำให้ทุกคนไปทางทิศทางเดียวกันไม่ขัดแข้งขัดขานกันโดยไม่เจตจำนงนะโอเคไหมครับเท่านั้นเองนะครับไม่ทราบว่าพอจะโอเคนะครับสรุปแค่นี้ครับผม
Okay, let's break. And I said a half hour. It's actually 15 minutes. Is that okay?
เบรก15 นาทีนะครับมีอะไรเดี๋ยวยกมือผมช่วยถามไม่ได้ครับผมขอบคุณครับ
Everything going okay? Yes. Good.
ไปไหนนอนหลับของไอ้แล้วของสัปดาห์กำลังเลยเรียนจะมาวิสัมภาษณ์
วายปัญญากิติมศักดิ์ให้ท่านกษัตริย์จักรีได้พระเจ้าเพราะว่าเขาจะเอามาให้จะเป็นโอเคอ๋อเหรอ
ใช่แอร์เย็นมากเลย
เย็นนะเพราะว่าเขาลบ25ตั้งแต่
เป่ามาฟันเลยมีสามเรื่องดู
เขากลับจากนอร์เวย์พร้อมกับท่านเสร็จเราก็หนาวนะเราไม่รู้ว่าเราหนาวเลยแต่เขาดีขึ้นไปข้างบนที่เราเยอะเกือบจะวันที่0 องศาถึง1 องศาเขาดีว่าเอาเสื้อกันหนาวใส่ทีแรกดูว่ามัน12นี่มันก็โอเคแต่ว่าไปกินไปเจอฝนหน่อยสำหรับเราเสื้อเขาธรรมดาก็ใส่เสื้อเหมือนของเขาผู้ชีพแล้ว
ใส่ทีเชิ้ตวิ่งเล่นเลยครับผมใส่แบบ ของผมที่นี่อันนี้สีเหรอของ IPS สีประมาณ300อาเซียนจะเยอะสุดอาเซียนจะเยอะนอกนั้นก็ยังมียุโรปมีอเมริกามีรัสเซียนะแล้วก็มีนักเรียนนักศึกษาที่ศิลป์นักเรียนจากฮังการีแล้วก็จะปีนี้ก็จะมีนักเรียนอาจารย์จากโปแลนด์แล้วก็นักศึกษาแล้วก็จะทำในตัวหลักสูตรระยะสั้นกับมหาวิทยาลัยออสโลที่โตเรียนรู้กันแบบว่าเรียนรู้กันหลักสูตรระยะสั้นประมาณ3 วันเป็นหลักเทรนนิ่งพอดีไปยังไม่รู้แบบออสโลเราต้องมาพร้อมกันครับท่านดูว่าแบบเดิมที่การเรียนผมอยู่ในสมุทรสาครอยู่ท่านลองเดียวกันทั้งนี้ผมเป็นผู้ช่วยการบริหารการเราทำมาได้ที่เราต้องเป็นรองที่จะการแล้วแค่นี่มีแค่5 หลักสูตรเองเรื่องสูตรปีแล้วแล้วหลักสูตรจะไม่เขียน1 หลักสูตรแต่ว่าไม่ควรจะเรื่องหลักสูตรปีนี้จะเปิดมี2 หลักสูตรหลักสูตรศาสนาปรัชญาของตัวหลักสูตรพุทธศาสนาภาษาอังกฤษมีวิสัยทัศน์ที่กับmotivation and discipline ทีนี้เด็ก300จบแล้วพี่ไม่มีถามที่
แล้วผมปีนี้เลยเอ็มวิวเห็นหน้าเขาโทรมาผมก็ไม่รู้
ผมก็บอกว่าหน้าเขาถามผมมาทุกใบผมบอกว่าเฮ้ยอันนี้ช่วยเลยอันนี้เก่งอยู่แล้ว
ไม่ใช่มันเขาไม่ไปขึ้น assessor มันจะไปตรวจอะไรนะ
ภายใน
แล้ว
แต่ว่าถ้าของสปวเนี่ยมันมีเรื่องหนึ่งถูกไหม
ตอนนี้ภายในเนี่ย
เกี่ยวกับภายใน
ให้ท่านรองสปได้ไหม
ได้ผมบอกว่าถ้าเราสปวให้เด็กเนี่ยเขาอยู่แล้วผมบอกเนี่ยเขาโทรหาผมบอกว่าบริษัทนะครับไอ้นี่สิ่งที่ดีกว่าแล้วผมไปแนะนำ
แล้วถ้าอาจารย์จะแจ้งได้ไหมถ้าท่านบอกจะสมองหรือ
ก็เดี๋ยวถามกันนะครับ
แต่สมองคนอีกไปด้วยกันนอนด้วยกันเนี่ยถ้าติดโควิดผมก็กลัวผมกันว่าผมไม่เป็นอะไร
คือผมว่า
น่าจะติดมาเมืองไทย
เขา
ติด
เขาไม่แน่ใจเขาปีฝึก10 เล่มปี60 เล่ม
เดียว
คุณมาขาด400 เล่มนะครับคือผมก็บอกว่าอย่างหน้าเนี่ยท่านชายใหญ่ดีกว่าเข้าเกี่ยวกับเลยบอกให้ขาย
เดี๋ยวผมถามให้เจ้าคุณจะต้องลองดู
ให้ผมเล่นให้ท่านเป็นทีม
ไอ้เจ้าคุณตรวจได้ใช่ไหมเจ้าคุณพ่อเราเพราะท่านเป็นทีมเอเซสเซอร์อะไรด้วย
ได้อย่างนี้เลยปีนี้เศร้ามากเลยที่เลยนะ300ที่อยู่
ทางดีเอซีก็ยังไม่พร้อมนะครับ
ไม่ตามไปเรื่อยตามไปเรื่อยวันละ15 20เครียดบริการมีแค่ไหนก็มีอยู่เจ็ดพิเศษเนี่ยคืออย่างเช่น7.1ข้อการเนี่ยเขาไม่สอนข้อความต้องการตายแล้ว1แล้วนะถูกต้องไม่มีเลยแล้วก็หมวด2คำตัวเดียวที่ผมเรียนคือก็ถูกก็ไม่มีที่สิ้นเขาไม่มีที่สิ้นแล้วแม้แต่ไม่มีเทรนไม่มีไม่ใช่ว่าคุณไม่30อยากให้มีที่สิ้นเขา7.4ก็ถามว่าการรับรู้วิเศษทัศน์แต่ไม่ได้บอกว่าประสิทธิผลของการสื่อสารตัดทิ้งเลยถูกไหมไม่จำเป็นบุคลากรพอแล้วขอให้มีก็พอถ้าถึงถ้า7.4เนี่ยถ้า separation คุณขึ้นอยู่แดน4เลยนะตายแล้วเนี่ย3เบสิกหายหมดทุกเบสิกหายหมดตอนเนี่ยเบสิกทั้งเบสิกขึ้น45 2เลยเหลือ20บอกว่าหรือคนนั้นเท่าไหร่40แล้วมีใครได้40 35ถึงก็เก่งเลยโย่หมดตายหมดเจ็บหมดผมบอกว่าโอเคทุกความต้องแต่ละกลุ่มเนี่ยคือเราชอบเขียนสิทธิ์ความต้องการพวกคุณเขียนสิทธิ์ความต้องการผมไม่อยากเป็นสิทธิ์หรือว่าคุณบอกในสำคัญเรื่องผมบอกนะ3ทุกกลุ่ม2ความต้องการก็น้อยอ่ะอะไรก็ผมจะเราเอาท่านมาด้วยผมเอา2อันนี้ก่อนให้รอดก่อนเพิ่มถูกไหมให้มาแล้วที่หลายฝั่งเลยนะแต่ละกลุ่ม2ที่มีปัญหาคือเราต้องการที่สิเป็นแบบที่ถ้า5ต้องอย่าง5กันน่ะที่10ที่มีองค์ความรู้สูงมีจรรยาบรรณความรู้สูงมาต้องวัดจรรยาบรรณต้องวัดไหมมีความรู้เรื่องภาษาอังกฤษวัดไหมคุณเชื่อยิ่งเยอะยิ่งตาย
เขียนไว้เยอะนี่ตาย
อันนี้
all 4 of the candidates came to the hospital for in-person interviews. And out of those 4, one of them had read the management document. And that person was able to say, based on reading this, here's what I think I can bring to your organization as value. Guess who they hired? They hired that person who had read it and thought about what they could do to help support that. So that's just one more idea of how you can use your management document and even just the organizational profile. I always encourage organizations as they put this together, share it with, if you have a board of directors, share it with your board of directors. Other stakeholders. If you're getting ready to hire a leader at any level, share maybe just the organizational profile, but share that to help them understand the organization before they interview. And it will help set up some of the questions that you would ask during that interview process. So again, even if you put together this application, this management document, and never submit it to the Thailand Quality Award, you have a very, very valuable document that hopefully your entire leadership team would be in agreement on what's in there, and it ends up being a great alignment tool. Now, if you put it together, it would be silly not to submit it to get an external assessment to say, here's what you're doing well, and here's what could be improved. But it is such a valuable document for what you are able to do. Okay, so let's go into some more detail to help you understand maybe a little bit more about what I talked about with that grid that had the core values and the criteria across the top, to say these are the things that are going to drive improvement in your organization. So the organizational profile, as I said earlier, the first part of it is the organizational description that says, what are your key organizational characteristics? Who are we? What do we do? Who are our employees? What's important to them? Who are our customers? What's our governance system? And then the organizational situation. What is your organization's strategic situation? What's important to us? And this is a series of questions that start with the word what. Now, that's kind of important because what is just saying, just tell me the facts. It doesn't say, how do we find out, what's important to our employees? It's just, here are the facts. How many employees? What's important to them? So what questions are just the facts? When we talk about process categories, most of those start with the word how, which means they want to understand step by step, how do you do your strategic planning? How do leaders lead? How do we listen to our students? So a series of questions starting with what. It ensures alignment of leaders about what's important to your organization. Now, if you're thinking about putting together a management document to submit to Thailand Quality Award, here's what I suggest that you not do. If you have a marketing department and they say, oh, we're very good at writing, you've got to tell them this is not a marketing document that says, lots of flowery language about what a great university we have. This is an exercise in technical writing. So when they ask, how do you do something? It isn't just, what I see sometimes with a first-time application is the question might be, how do you do your strategic planning? And the response is, we do strategic planning, and that's about it. As opposed to, through the year, here are the steps of our strategic planning process. We gather information, we synthesize information, we have a leadership meeting to establish strategy, then we deploy our strategy. So we want to be sure that it's a technical document that looks at the questions and answers the question, but doesn't do it in a real marketing document kind of way. So the organizational profile, as I've said, is a consistent message to communicate with stakeholders such as the workforce, the board of directors, donors, partners and suppliers, community members, that says, here's what our university is and here's what's important to us. Probably the most important thing with that is that when it's developed, that the leaders sit around a table and the senior leader says, okay, everybody, have you read the organizational profile and are you in agreement with it? Because that is how you align a leadership team to what's important. So here are the parts of the organizational profile in the organizational description of here's who we are. You're describing your product and service offerings. What do we do? And it uses the word key throughout. So it doesn't mean that you have to list every class that you provide. It's, the 3 or 4 things that are the key kinds of services that you provide. The mission, vision, values, and culture. Now, in this area, you've got your mission, you've got your values, but then to be able to describe what the culture is at your university. And one of the other things it asks for in here is, what are your core competencies? And that's something that most people say, well, what is that? Is that the competencies that our employees need to have? No, it's looking at your university and saying, what are the 3 or 4 things that we think we do best? Not the things that you do. So it isn't just saying our core competency is providing an education. It's saying what sets us apart from other universities. Why would somebody choose to come here? And okay, I'm going to express my ignorance here. Are there other Buddhist studies universities in Thailand? Yes? Okay. So what is it about IBSC that would make someone choose to come here versus another Buddhist studies university? So those would be your core competencies. And it shouldn't be 10 or 15. It should be probably 2, 3, 4 things that set you apart from others. Okay. So that's something that's in there that is confusing to a lot of people, and just being able to say the 3 or 4 things that you do best. Okay, the workforce profile, I've talked about that. That has changed recently. It used to ask, what are the educational requirements and all kinds of things. It's really narrowed down now to, can we identify what our employee groups are and what are called the key engagement factors for each of those groups. So, in a university, I might think that your workforce groups might be senior leadership, faculty, support. So it isn't, 20 different groups. It's what are those similar groups that might have similar engagement factors. Assets is, you know, what do you have? You know, your campus is your biggest asset, and think about, you know, all those other things that are, I hate to put it this way, but it's probably the things that cost a lot of money. What are those assets that you have? The regulatory environment, you know, every organization has a regulatory environment. You know, I'm a one-person consulting company. I have a regulatory environment that essentially is, you know, how do I pay my taxes and things like that. So relatively simple. A healthcare organization, a university, is probably going to have many more regulations than what I would have. The organizational structure is, you know, do you have a board of directors? What is the structure of how what's called governance happens? So who do your leaders report to? So then who are your students, other customers, and stakeholders? So just like with the workforce profile, you're thinking about what are those key groups, not every single detailed one, but the key groups that you look at, and what are their requirements. When you get into the actual criteria itself, it will ask, how do you know what your workforce engagement factors are? How do you know what your students and other customers' requirements are? So you want to be sure it isn't just, you know, Bill saying, okay, the requirements are this, this, and this. You want to be sure that it's fact-based as opposed to bill-based. Okay, and then suppliers, partners, and collaborators. Every organization is going to be different there. You know, for instance, for me, I don't have a lot of suppliers or collaborators, but you probably do, for everything from utilities to, you know, your key suppliers. Probably the most important thing here is to say, what do you spend the most money on, as opposed to, you know, the supplier of paper and things like that. So the word key is used lots of times through the criteria, and that just means think about the priority of these. Who are the primary, the key suppliers, the key students and customers, the key assets? Okay, so you can see how that would be a pretty good description of here's who we are. And then what's important, you talk about your competitive position. You talk about changes in what the competitive position is. You know, are there new universities starting? Are there, you know, a competitiveness change is probably, I don't know if you do anything, you know, online courses, but that's been a big change in universities in the US, is the ability to provide online education. In, you know, when I went to college about 100 years ago, you know, everybody had to live on campus and sit in a classroom, and those kind of things are changing now. Comparative data, what kind of data do you have that helps you understand your relative performance? How do you compare to other similar universities? Strategic context is, what are your strategic challenges? What are your strategic advantages? What are your strategic threats and your strategic opportunities? So what are important things that you're facing? Because as you respond to your processes, and especially in the strategic planning area, they want to be sure that if you see something as being a challenge, you're doing things to address that challenge. If you have identified strategic advantages, they want to see that you're taking advantage of the strategic advantages you have. You know, strategic advantage can be even your reputation among other Buddhist studies universities. Okay, and this last one, your performance improvement system. Remember when I talked about how important it is to have a culture of continuous improvement. This is asking, how do you address opportunities for improvement? If you have a problem, do you have we use the word systematic, a consistent way to address a problem? Do you, we use what's called a Plan, Do, Check Act or a Plan, Do, Study Act process to say, here's what our problem is. Here's the research we did to understand how others might address that. Now we're going to implement that solution and test it. And then after we found that, yes, it does what it's supposed to do, then we're going to fully implement it. So having some form of a process to improve the way you do things is what you're addressing here. And then through the management document, they'll be looking for how do you use that system. Okay. Let me ask, do you have a performance improvement system here at IBSC? Do you think?
มีวิธีการหรือว่าแนวทางในการปรับปรุงผลการดำเนินการไหมครับอย่างเป็นทางการ
Oh, SBAR? Okay. Yeah. So if you use SBAR, that's what you would describe in your performance improvement system here. And then they would be looking for evidence of how you use SBAR in different situations to improve the way you lead, the way you plan, all of those things. Very good. Okay, so we're not going to do this, but here are some of the, when an organization puts together their organizational profile, what I suggest to them is that there are particular sets of questions like the workforce profile. Okay, whoever is in charge of human resources can put that together. The customer, the student and customer question, you can assign someone who would have the expertise to put that together. But these are the questions in the profile that I suggest that as a leadership team, you come together to answer these, because they're the questions that are not, they probably haven't been answered before. So that idea of what are your core competencies, that's probably something that hasn't been asked because it's just a different concept. So, getting together as a leadership group to say, what are our core competencies, and kind of struggling through it to say, here's what we do. The one on workforce and employees, that can typically be the HR person. I'm not sure who would be the one on key student groups, but then the key changes that are happening is a good one for a group to come to agreement on, as well as the strategic challenge, threats, advantages, and opportunities. So even if you delegate people to put those together, then you want to have one person who is going to gather all that, put it together into the one organizational profile document, and then share it and say, okay, is everybody in agreement on this? And if somebody on that leadership team or even outside the leadership team says, you know what, I disagree with that, or I think you've missed one of the strategic challenges or strategic advantages, you factor that into the decision making. And by the time you get to the point that everybody is saying, yes, this accurately represents us, that's when you've got a really valuable document there, even if you don't go any further with the process than writing that organizational profile. Now, Bill, I'm not sure if this is the same with Thailand Quality Award, but with Baldridge, that document, the organizational profile, can only be 5 pages.
More or less about that. We have 120 pages altogether.
Okay. And that may be just the alphabet and everything that is different. A Baldridge application can only be a total of 55 pages with the organizational profile being 5 pages. The key is to be focused in it and not provide everything, provide the important information. But it's a great document for you, but it's also a very important document for the examiners who are going to be reviewing your application, because they will go through that organizational profile and put together what is called the key factors. So out of those 5 pages or more, they will pull out the important things. Here are the employee groups and their engagement factors. So when they assess the workforce category of processes, they're going to be doing it in the context of what you say is important. So it ends up being a very customized feedback report, because the organizational profile, the examiners don't assess it. If you say, these are our challenges, these are our advantages, these are our employee engagement factors, they don't say, oh, I don't think that's a challenge, or I don't think that's an employee engagement factor. They take your word on it, and they use this to set the context for what they review, so that every feedback report is customized to what you said is important. It's to determine eligibility, clarify the scope, and again, examiners use it to develop those key factors. Now, there are some other things that they will think about as potential key factors, because they'll look in the rest of the management document, and there are a few what questions scattered throughout. So what are your key work systems? What are your organization's key strategic objectives and timetable? What are your key performance measures? Those things are things that they may put into the key factors, because they want to be sure that when they're reviewing, that if you say these are our strategic objectives, they want to be sure that you're addressing those strategic objectives. So it is a very customized feedback report, an assessment that you will get, because it isn't just, I think of regulatory site visits, regulatory audits. They come in with a checklist of what they're looking for that's standard for any kind of organization in healthcare or education. They say, are you doing this? Whereas this one is saying, what's important to you? And then we're going to put together our feedback report in the context of what you said is important. The only thing I'm going to talk about here is this last one, that a good organizational profile helps ensure that the feedback report you receive will be relevant. Every once in a while, I see an application that someone has written, and we send a team out to look at the organization, and the team calls in and says, you know what? This organization is not what they described in the application. So, lots of times they'll try to make themselves sound so much better than they are. And then when the examiners get there, it's like they're not doing all these things that they said they were doing. The key is you're absolutely honest in putting together your feedback report, because then you will get feedback that's relevant to what you're actually doing and where you want to go. So that's that's really important. Again, the technical writing aspect of it and being completely honest on things. Okay, so I spend quite a bit of time, like I just did, on the organizational profile because, again, I think it's so important to get the organizational profile right in order to put together a good and accurate management document that's going to help you move forward. So now let's talk about the actual criteria. I showed you the model in a different way, but remember the core values underneath are what supports the criteria itself. Here's what you aspire to be, and the criteria is moving you towards being the organization represented by the core values and concepts. You can see on the left-hand side, the organizational profile. That's the place to start. Once you have that complete, and I can't emphasize enough, you want to do that first and complete it before you do the rest. Now, the rest can all be done together. But these are the different categories that you'll be looking at. First is what we call the driver categories. It's leadership, strategy, and customer. And remember, customer for the education sector would be students, other stakeholders. So the reason we call that drivers is that at the biggest picture, it's leadership, understanding what the customer wants, and building it into strategy. Okay, so that's the drivers. It sets direction for the organization. The second part is what we call core work. The core work is people doing processes. Okay, so really that's what everyday work is. It's people doing processes, which is the operations category. Down below is what we call the brain center. It's the category that's called measurement, analysis, and knowledge management. And it's all about how do you ensure that you have data and knowledge to make good decisions. So it's how do you review organizational performance? It's how do you share information and knowledge? With knowledge management, I think of kind of three places where knowledge resides in an organization. Okay, the first is, old-fashioned paper. Okay, it's in file drawers. Remember when everything was in file drawers? Those of you who are older. So there's still paper out there. And then there's knowledge that's stored electronically in the cloud, on my phone, wherever. And then the third place that knowledge is stored is in people's heads. One of the challenges that we're facing in the United States is there are so many people that are my age that are retiring. And what happens when people retire? Everything that's in their head goes out the door. So there's a lot of talk of how do we get what's in Paul's head and share it with people who need that knowledge moving forward. So think about that when you think about knowledge management. Paper, electronic, and what's in people's heads. And then the final category is results. And when you report results in your management document, it's just that. It isn't telling how you get results. It's just charts saying, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And how do we stack up against others? Remember when we talked in the organizational profile about comparative data? This is where you use your comparative data to show For other similar universities, here's what our student satisfaction is, here's what our graduation rate is, things like that. How do we stack up against others? Are we getting better? And are we any good? Wait, say that.
I think this diagram is very important.
Very important.
So I would like Ajahn, you will explain for a while to explain more about this diagram. Please, Ajahn.
Yeah, and before you do, this is the thing that every single thing that you do here at IBSC can fit someplace in these. So if it's strategic planning, it's right there. If it's checking the paper towels in the men's room, it's somewhere in there. Everything fits someplace in here.
เอาแบบไทยๆนะฮะเข้าใจง่ายๆคือผมจะย้อนจากด้านหลังเข้ามานะผลลัพธ์เป็นสิ่งที่สำคัญที่สุดนะถูกไหมครับมันจะบอกว่าเราทำสิ่งที่ถูกต้องไหมเราทำได้เลิศแค่ไหนผลการดำเนินงานตรงกับความที่เราต้องการหรือเปล่าทำไมต่อมา workforce cooperation นะครับในมุมมองของผู้เรียนหรือลูกค้าเขามองเข้ามาองค์กรเราสองสิ่งที่เขามองเห็นคือคนของเราและวิธีการทำงานของเราเท่านั้นเองถูกไหมเขาจะไม่เห็นอย่างอื่นเลยถูกไหมแต่ว่ากว่าจะได้คนและแนวทางที่การดำเนินการเนี่ยมันขึ้นกับ driver 3 สิ่งก็คือผู้นำยังไงผู้เรียนลูกค้ากลุ่มอื่นเรามีลักษณะแบบไหนและกลยุทธ์ที่เราจะใช้ในการส่งมอบคุณค่าให้เขาอย่างไรโอเคไหมครับถ้ามองแบบนี้ท่านจะพอจะเห็นนะผลลัพธ์สำคัญที่สุด2 เรื่องที่ทำให้มีผลลัพธ์ก็คือบุคลากรกับวิธีการทำงานของเรา2 เรื่องนี้มันขึ้นอยู่กับ3 องค์กรองค์ประกอบแรกการนำองค์กรกลยุทธ์และคุณลักษณะของผู้เรียนและลูกค้าไอ้ส่วนข้างล่างเนี่ยก็คือทุกอย่างนะในการตัดสินใจเนี่ยเราควรจะมีข้อมูลนะครับไม่ควรจะใช้ว่านึกว่าคิดว่าคงจะน่าจะเป็นนะถ้าเราสามารถใช้ management fact เนี่ยการดำเนินการในองค์กรจะรวดเร็วมากมีประสิทธิภาพที่สูงส่วนข้างหน้าเนี่ยบริบทองค์กรหมายถึงอะไรครับถ้าท่านไม่สามารถอธิบายบริบทองค์กรให้ผู้ตรวจประเมินหรือว่าคนอื่นเข้าใจนะคอมเมนต์ต่างๆที่เขาจะมอบให้เนี่ยอาจจะไม่มีคุณค่าเท่าที่ควรสำหรับท่านแต่เหตุผลที่ท่านเล่าว่าบริบทองค์กรคือเราคือใครเราทำอะไรเราทำเพื่อใครตอบสนองอะไรของเขาส่งมอบคุณค่าอะไรให้เขาโดยใช้เครื่องไม้เครื่องมือแบบไหนคนแบบไหนสถานที่แบบไหนภายใต้กฎระเบียบอะไรสิ่งเหล่านี้มันเป็นองค์ประกอบที่ทำให้ผู้อื่นเข้าใจบริบทเราง่ายยิ่งขึ้นคอมเมนต์ต่างๆที่เขาจะให้เราเนี่ยจะทำให้เราสามารถพัฒนาดีขึ้นดีอย่างมากกว่านี้นะครับส่วน6กระบวนการในนี้นะครับไม่ว่าองค์กรไหนก็ตามไม่ว่าท่านพูดถึงกิจกรรมการดำเนินงานอะไรก็ตามมั่นใจว่าสามารถที่จะใส่เข้าไปส่วนใดส่วนหนึ่งในทั้งหมดนี้นะครับคุณพอพูดถึงว่าแม้แต่ว่าโอเคกระดาษห้องน้ำอยู่ตรงไหนครับอาจจะอยู่ workforce ก็ได้ถูกไหมมันขึ้นอยู่ว่ากระดาษนั้นเป็นความต้องการของผู้เรียนหรือว่าความต้องการของบุคลากรทุกสิ่งที่ท่านดำเนินการเนี่ยท่านสามารถจัดหมวดหมู่หรือว่าใส่เข้าไปในนี้ได้นะครับมันคุมจักรวาลทั้งหมดนะครับโอเคไหมครับไม่ทราบจะพอโอเคไหมครับ
Paul, let me add more. I'm sorry, Paul. Yeah. I think let me add more. อนุญาตขยายความท่านอาจารย์คือ because not just we who being here, my colleague, because we just came from Norway We went to Scandinavia for 10 days, and when we back, there a lot of monk and they got COVID-19. That's why they are unable to come to join us today. Mostly they have to take a rest in their house or their temple. คืออาจารย์อยากจะอธิบายอย่างนี้นะอันเนี้ยถือว่าเป็นชุดความคิดที่เป็นเมนสตรีมของเครื่องมือที่เรานำมาใช้งานคือถ้าเรามองจากมุมอาจารย์อาตมาจะอธิบายในภาษาของพระนะอริยสัจสี่นะที่อาตมาพยายามจะบอกอยู่บ่อยๆเรื่องอริยสัจสี่ในมรรค8เนี่ยมรรค8พระพุทธเจ้าวางกระบวนการเอาไว้8ข้อในการทำงานในการ drive คนเนี่ยไปบรรลุมรรคผลนิพพาน result คือตัวนิโรธสิ่งที่เราต้องการจะบรรลุเนี่ยคือตัวนิโรธนะคือปักหมุดเอาไว้ตอนปลายเหมือนที่ท่านอาจารย์บิวท่านพูดเนี่ยเราอยากจะเห็นหน้าตาของตัวเราเป็นยังไงก็คือการบรรลุมรรคผลนิพพาน result ของเราคือการดับทุกข์ ending suffering ใช่ไหมทีนี้ result ขององค์กรของเราก็คือพาคนไปดับทุกข์ถ้าเรามองข้างนอกคือพาคนไปดับทุกข์จะพาไปยังไงก็วางตัวชี้วัดว่าหน้าตาของ learner มันควรจะเป็นยังไงนะบอกหน้าตาได้เห็นชัดได้ที่เราพูดถึงตัว PLO นะ knowledge อยากจะได้ยังไงตัวที่เป็นskill ก็ตามตัวที่เป็นเรื่องของ ethic ก็ตามตัวที่เป็น character ก็ตามเนี่ยอยากจะได้เห็นหน้าตาก็เป็นยังไงทีนี้พอเราเห็นตอนปลายเรียบร้อยแล้วเนี่ยมันก็จะ backward design กลับมาออกแบบแล้วทีนี้มันก็กลับมาหาตัวต้นทางว่าตัวก้อนเนี้ยของมันทั้งหมดเนี่ยการที่ผู้นำจะไปออกแบบเครื่องไม้เครื่องมือในการทำงานผู้นำกับตัว senior leader จะต้องเข้าใจความต้องการของ learner หาให้เจอว่า VOC ก็ตามพวกเนี้ยตัวนี้เขาต้องการอะไรกันแน่เพนพอยต์ของเขาคืออะไรทุกสมุทัยของเขาคืออะไรหาให้มันเจอแล้วก็นำทุกกับสมุทัยของ learner เนี่ยเพนพอยต์ก็ตามแล้วก็ตัว factor of pain point นี่มันมีอะไรหาได้แล้วหลังจากนั้นก็นำเอาตัวความต้องการของ learner เนี่ยมาออกแบบกลยุทธ์ว่าเราจะวางกลยุทธ์ของเราตั้งแต่ vision mission นะเราจะวางยังไงวางตัว strategic objective ยังไง short term middle term long term เราจะทำยังไงเราก็มาเล่นตรงนี้ให้มันเรียบร้อยคือคุยให้มันจบว่าอย่างนั้นเถอะให้มันจบว่าจะเอายังไงนะพอคุยจบก้อนนี้เรียบร้อยแล้วทีนี้ก็ต้องหาคนมาทำงานใช่ไหมเอา workforce มาดึง workforce มาก็ต้องหาคนที่มันเหมาะกับ strategy ของเราหาคนที่มันเหมาะไม่ใช่ไปหาใครก็ไม่รู้ pain point อย่างหนึ่ง strategy อย่างหนึ่งได้จบเรียบร้อยแล้วแต่ว่า workforce ไปอีกอย่างหนึ่งมันต้องหาคนที่เหมาะกับงานที่เรากำลังจะเอาไปทำใช่ไหมแล้วก็ลงสู่ operation ที่ว่าเนี่ยลงสู่การปฏิบัติงานการทำงานไปออกแบบนะแต่ว่าสิ่งสำคัญที่ก้อนนี้ที่พอเขาวิ่งมาที่นี่ก่อนเนี่ยก็เพราะว่าเขาต้องใช้ brain คือต้องใช้ brain center มันคือสมองทั้งหมดนะอาจารย์เป็นศูนย์บัญชาการเป็นศูนย์ควบคุมทั้งหมดตั้งแต่การประเมินจะทำยังไงเราจะวิเคราะห์สภาพต่างๆยังไงเราจะเอาองค์ความรู้ที่เป็น key ไอ้ตัวที่เป็น core competency ของเราทั้งหมดที่เรามีอยู่องค์ความรู้ในองค์กรเพราะว่าอะไรเพราะเวลาเข้ามาเนี่ยเขาเห็นว่าเราเป็นแหล่งความรู้ที่จะสามารถเสิร์ฟเขาได้ไงไอ้พวกที่เป็น knowledge management หรือว่า innovation สำคัญที่เรามีอยู่ทั้งหมดเนี่ยเอาพวกเนี้ยมันเป็นคลังเอามาเสิร์ฟมาซัพพอร์ตพวกนี้ฉะนั้นที่เราเห็นทั้งหมดเนี่ยมันจะอลายกันในมรรค8ที่บอกเนี่ยอันนี้คือมรรค7พระพุทธเจ้าพูดถึงมรรค8แต่ทั้งนี้ทั้งนั้นมันต้องมีเสาเข็มของมันเนี่ยถ้ามันไม่มีตัวล่าง11ข้อของค่านิยมเนี่ยนะที่เราพูดกันมาตั้งแต่ต้นมันไม่มีทางหรอกเพราะว่าไอ้ตัวนี้มันจะเป็นเสาเข็มคอยพยุงไอ้ข้างบนให้มันอยู่ให้ได้ถ้าไม่มีตัวนี้ข้างบนยังไงมันก็เป๋นะแต่ทั้งนี้ทั้งนั้นมันต้องมาสัมพันธ์กับที่อาจารย์พูดสภาพแวดล้อมองค์กรสิ่งที่เรามีทั้งหมดว่าเราหน้าตาเราเป็นยังไงอันนี้ก็อยากจะเพิ่ม Sorry, I talk to them in Thai. Yeah, just let them understand. Yeah, I just need-
I just thought of something that I wanted to bring up, which you may have brought up. But remember when we talked about systems perspective? This helps you put together that systems perspective, because the drivers that set direction ensure that by knowing the customer requirements, the workforce needs to understand what those workforce requirements are so that they can be sure that they are meeting those customer requirements. You need to be sure that the way you present your classes, your services that you provide meet the customer requirements. All of those are probably aligned at the high level in the strategy of the organization. So it really helps you accomplish that that systems perspective that, like I said, virtually every organization that I work with says, gosh, this is something we need to work on. So when you put together this document, while this might be the human resources group that kind of naturally provides a lot of input into that, you want to be sure that it isn't silos like we talked about. That's the opposite of systems perspective. Okay, now I do want to tell you, I'm looking at my phone now and then, and I want to, the reason I'm doing that is that Dr. Sunny is watching on YouTube, and I want to be sure that he doesn't provide some input that would be valuable. So between Dr. Sunny and Bill, I've got great people supporting me today. All right, now it is 11:30. Our lunch break is from 11:30 to 1. So let's take our lunch break now, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the specifics of the criteria. Okay? Wait. I want to take 2 selfies with this group and this group. Okay? So just keep your seats. No, good. Okay. Yeah, got everybody. 1, 2, 3. Good. And I want to be sure I've got everybody. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I've got a shiny 4. Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll come back together at 1 o'clock. Thanks for a great session this morning. Thank you. Oh, this way she knows I'm working and not up heavy.
เชิญทุกท่านและก็นิมนต์ทุกท่านนะครับฉันสเตนแล้วก็รับประทานอาหารที่ฝั่งคาเฟ่วิสตัมคาเฟ่นะครับขอบคุณครับI would like to invite all of you to have lunch together in the Grizzell cafe.